Over in the Netherlands, President Yoon and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte have made the two nations chip alliance official, coming at a time when supply chain risks are higher and the global race in the chip industry is getting heated. Following the Camp David agreement, South Korea, the US, and Japan will soon start sharing missile warning data on North Korea in real time, against which Pyongyang fired back angrily. The U.S. key rate remains unchanged, but the Fed chair hints at 3 possible rate cuts next year. It's December 14, 2023. This is News Center.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. Over in the Netherlands, President Yoon and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte made official the two countries' chip alliance, coming at a time when supply chain risks are high and the global race in the chip industry gets heated to maintain a super gap lead. The South Korean president now wraps up his trip and returns home. Correspondent Oh Soo-young starts us off.
South Korea and the Netherlands have agreed to build a semiconductor alliance and new strategic dialogue channels amid the conflation of global security and economic challenges. President Yoon and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Wednesday shared the outcome of their bilateral talks at The Hague upon Yoon's state visit to the country. As the global race to develop the most advanced microchips continues to heat up, given the technology's implications on the nation's economic and military prowess, Yoon and Rutte committed to building value chains between their governments, firms and universities.
한국과 네덜란드 간의 반도체 동맹을 구축했다고 하는 것은 저희들이 반도체의 그 초격차를 유지하고 최첨단의 기술을 함께 구축해 나가기 위해서 저희들이 중요한 과학 기술적인 문제들에 대해서 함께 논의하고 해결하고 정보를 긴밀하게 공유한다는 그런 뜻입니다.
Officially adopting the term Semiconductor Alliance in their joint statement, the two sides agreed to establish a bilateral semiconductor dialogue for better industry support and policy coordination, and a semiconductor talent program to nurture professionals in the field. Also, they set out to promote more information exchanges between their governments and establish a new economic security dialogue, along with a biennial 2+2 dialogue for foreign affairs and industry officials at the ministerial level to cover all critical technologies.
This is expected to greatly contribute to strategic coordination in the areas of supply chain, economic security and export control, including semiconductors.
Identifying both traditional and emerging security challenges, the two sides also inked a deal to expand defence cooperation and continue cyber policy talks and advance global discussions on setting new norms on the military use of artificial intelligence. Further broadening the areas of cooperation, having upgraded their bilateral ties to a strategic partnership last year, the two governments inked MOUs on joint research and development in nuclear energy, carbon-free energy sources and ICT, in the digital, AI, quantum and cybersecurity sectors. Other major deals include building South Korea's first cold chain logistics hub in Europe, as well as R&D on neuroscience and smart agriculture, and promoting cultural exchanges. Looking forward, the two leaders emphasized their shared values of liberal democracy and rule of law as the basis of their future partnership. In that regard, they reaffirmed their commitment to peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region, which sees some 60% of the world's maritime trade pass through, and jointly condemned North Korea's nuclear and missile development. They also opposed the regime's arms exchange with Russia, while expressing their continued support for Ukraine amid Moscow's ongoing invasion. The President's office says South Korea will continue to bolster its security and economic resilience by expanding its network of like-minded countries, fostered by Yoon's active summit diplomacy this year. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, The Hague.
And bilateral network expansion was also broadened to include the corporate arenas of the two countries at their first business forum in Amsterdam. Park Gon-woo has details.
The first business forum between South Korea and the Netherlands was held at an Amsterdam hotel on Wednesday local time, where the two nations agreed to strengthen cooperation, especially in the semiconductor industry. The forum took place during South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's 4-day state visit to the Netherlands, with King Willem Alexander, government officials, and 200 entrepreneurs from both countries, including CEOs of Samsung Electronics, SK Group, and ASML also present. ASML is a Dutch chip equipment supplier for South Korea's Samsung and SK, the world's largest memory chip makers. President Yoon began his keynote speech by addressing the relationship between both nations.
네덜란드는 60여 년 전에 한국이 유럽과의 무역을 본격화하기 위해 최초로 무역관을 개설한 국가입니다.
He added the two countries have been expanding cooperation, recording an all-time high trading volume last year, twice as much compared to the pre-pandemic era. And he said South Korea and the Netherlands should strengthen their cooperative relationship even more.
앞으로 양국 간 협력이 더욱 활성화되기 위해서는 반도체 분야의 전략적 연대를 더욱 공고히 다져야 합니다.
President Yoon also announced at the event that companies from the two nations will build a joint R&D center in Korea, provide opportunities for graduate school students to learn cutting-edge technologies together, as well as the establishment of chip dialogue channels between the two governments. He also said collaboration in the carbon-free energy sector, including nuclear, hydrogen, and offshore wind power, along with the logistics sector, will be expanded. On the sidelines of the forum, a total of 19 MOUs and agreements in cutting-edge technology, renewable energy, logistics, and agriculture were made between the governments and companies of both countries. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Yoon also sought to honor the Dutch veterans who fought to defend the South during the Korean War, as he highlighted the long-standing historical connection between South Korea and the Netherlands, which actually dates back even further. Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
At the Royal Palace of Amsterdam on Wednesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol met with around 20 Dutch Korean War veterans and members of their families. He also showed gratitude for the swift decision by the Netherlands to support the South during the Korean War.
우리 정부와 국민은 70여 년 전 공산 침략에 맞서 싸운 네덜란드 청년들이 흘린 피를 결코 잊지 않고 그러한 감사의 마음 위에 양국의 굳건한 연대가 지속되어 오고 있는 것입니다.
More than 5,000 Dutch soldiers were deployed to South Korea during the war, and more than 120 died. They participated in a number of key battles, including in Inje, Gangwon-do province. President Yoon also took the opportunity to award a, quote, hero's uniform to a 93-year-old Dutch veteran. King Willem-Alexander also showed his appreciations to the war hero.
Just as our country received help from the United States, United Kingdom and Canadian forces during World War II, 5 years later you went to South Korea and fought for freedom. Even now, 70 years later, you are still receiving expressions of gratitude from South Korea.
The historical connection between South Korea and the Netherlands dates even further back. President Yoon, in fact, while at The Hague, visited the Ridderzaal, where the Second World Peace Conference was held in 1907.
President Yoon, together with Prime Minister Rutte, viewed exhibits related to the 1907 World Peace Conference and paid tribute to the patriotic spirit and noble cause of the national heroes.
Korean diplomats, led by Lee Jun, were dispatched to the conference to speak up for Korea's sovereignty amid Imperial Japan's attempts to colonize the peninsula. However, the diplomats were not admitted to the conference due to rejection by Japan at the time. President Yoon is the first South Korean president to visit the site, and he explained to Prime Minister Rutte why the place has special meaning for Koreans. After the visit, President Yoon also paid a short visit to the Ijun Peace Museum. There, the top office says President Yoon took a look at the room Ijun stayed in while making efforts to spread the word about the unjust occupation by Japan. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, Trilateral defense cooperation, including the sharing of missile warning data in real time, may be imminent 4 months after the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan reached an agreement at Camp David. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-shi reports.
South Korea, the U.S. and Japan will likely begin sharing real-time information on North Korean missiles in a few days. This is according to a White House official on Wednesday local time during a keynote speech at Washington, D.C.'s Brookings Institution. U.S. NSC Senior Director for East Asia and Oceania, Mira Rep Hooper, said, quote, "We're on track to make good on our promise to be sharing real-time missile warning data by the end of this year, and in fact, we expect that to be operational within the next few days." The announcement came 4 months after the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan met at Camp David back in August and decided to actively share more information on North Korea. Officials from the three countries have since been working to share real-time warning data. Pyongyang criticized the move in its official newspaper on Thursday. According to the Rodong Sinmun, it called the real-time data sharing a, quote, reckless military move, adding that it had the underlying sinister intention of seeking an opportunity for a war by invading North Korea. It also said the Trilateral cooperation was also intended to check on China and Russia. A South Korean Unification Ministry official told reporters that the government found it regrettable that Pyongyang was blatantly criticizing legitimate security cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo amid its own provocations, such as developing illegal nuclear weapons that violated UN Security Council resolutions. The official urged Pyongyang to return to dialogue and break away from provocations and threats. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea scrambled fighter jets after Chinese and Russian military planes entered its Korea Air Defense Identification Zone over waters off the country's east coast. The country's military said 2 Chinese and 4 Russian planes briefly entered the KADIZ for 17 minutes at about noon on Thursday, but it added they did not violate the country's airspace. The military said it detected the aircraft before their entry and mobilized the Air Force's fighter jets to cover any eventualities. Chinese and Russian planes had also flown into the KADIZ earlier in June. The KADIZ is not territorial airspace, but is an area where foreign planes are required to identify themselves to prevent clashes. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to keep its benchmark interest rates unchanged, but the Fed chair hints at 3 possible rate cuts next year. Our economics correspondent Shin Ha-young has more.
During the U.S. Fed's last meeting of this year, policymakers on the Federal Open Market Committee decided to maintain interest rates for the 3rd consecutive time. With the Fed's latest move, the benchmark interest rates in the U.S. now stand in the range of 5.25% to 5.5%, marking a 22-year high. The decision is largely attributed to robust employment and a slowdown in inflation. The Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation for last month, rose 3.1% on year, the lowest increase since June due to a drop in energy prices. Consumer prices have been slowing after hitting 9.1% in June of last year. On Wednesday, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell acknowledged that the current level is likely at its peak, but emphasized that it's far too early to declare victory.
While we believe that our policy rate is likely at or near its peak for this tightening cycle, the economy has surprised forecasters in many ways since the pandemic. Ongoing progress toward our 2% inflation objective is not assured.
According to the Fed, the interest rate is expected to tick down to 4.6% next year, hinting that the Fed may cut the rate by 1/4 of a percentage point 3 times in 2024. Following the Fed's announcement, U.S. stocks welcomed the news. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wednesday surged 1.4%, closing at a new record high. The S&P 500 rose by 1.37%, while the Nasdaq closed with a 1.38% gain. Meanwhile, the latest Fed rate freeze means the key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. remains at 2 percentage points. One expert says the BOK needs a clear signal from the U.S. to consider rate cuts.
Bank of Korea may decide to cut the rates a bit earlier if they are sure that the U.S. will start cutting the rates. But again, because the Fed has not given a very clear signal on when they will start to lower the rates, it may take quite a while. If we see household debts increasing very quickly, then I don't think the Bank of Korea can afford to cut the rates, or at least not cut rates very quickly.
He added that considering the Fed's forecast of a 2.9% interest rate in 2026, the BOK may not be able to lower its rate in parallel with the U.S. pace. 신하영, Arirang News.
South Korea's auto exports hit their highest value so far this year on strong demand for eco-friendly cars. They are now on course to break the $70 billion mark for the first time. An Song-jin reports.
South Korea's automobile exports this year have hit a record high for the January to November period. According to Trade Ministry, amid greater demand for eco-friendly cars, the value of exports reached $64.5 billion. In November alone, the value of exports saw the highest monthly figure ever, reaching $6.53 billion, which is some $30 million more than the previous record set in March. This record has been attributed to an increase in exports of high-value eco-friendly cars such as the EV9 to the North American market. Exports to that region saw an on-year increase of 51%, making it the biggest market for Korean vehicles, followed by the EU. For those vehicles that were affected by the Inflation Reduction Act, such as EVs, hydrogen vehicles, and plug-in hybrid cars, despite concerns, the number of vehicles exported was the highest ever for November. Some 134,000 Korean electric vehicles were exported to the U.S. in the year up to November, nearly twice last year's figure. As the number of vehicles produced from January to November was 3.88 million, it is nearly certain that this year will be the first time since 2018 that the number of vehicles produced in Korea exceeds 4 million. Han Song-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's total population could drop to around 36 million within 50 years. This is according to Statistics Korea Today, based on a comparatively positive calculation of Korea's current birth rate of 0.7 rising to at least 1.0. But Statistics Korea said if the current birth rate continues, the population could even shrink to under 30 million in the year 2072. The projection also showed that in 50 years, almost half of the population will consist of elderly people aged 65 and over. The aggregate population for the nation in 2022 was around 51 million. G-Dragon, the leader of the K-pop group BIGBANG, has been cleared of all drug-related charges and is no longer under investigation. The police announced on Thursday that a detailed analysis of recent reagent drug tests using urine and hair samples were all negative. The 35-year-old singer, whose real name is Kwon Ji-young, constantly denied committing any drug-related crimes from the very beginning when he was accused of drug use. Recent fears over a potential urea shortage have exposed the need for South Korea to diversify its supply chain. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin joins me in the studio to take a look at what's causing the problem and what's being done to manage the supply chain issue. Good to see you, Soo-jin.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Tell us what's going on with the urea shortage.
Sure. So the South Korean government confirmed early December that China has halted urea exports to South Korea. And this has led to a wave of concerns over a potential repeat of the urea shortage crisis in 2021, which caused nationwide logistic disruptions. Urea is a key raw material because it's mixed with water to create diesel exhaust fluid, a urea solution that's essential for diesel vehicles. Those purchased after 2015 are installed with a system that doesn't allow them to start when they run out of DEF, as it's used to control harmful vehicle emissions. Urea is also used in agricultural fertilizer. Although urea fertilizers are less of a concern, as only around 22% of urea fertilizers came from China this year, compared to a whopping 91% of urea for vehicles and industrial use.
Soo-jin, how does this situation compare to the urea shortage crisis in 2021?
Well, first of all, the circumstances surrounding these urea halts are different. In 2021, China halted urea exports amid a trade row with Australia, but this time it's from China experiencing a surge in domestic prices due to increased demand from nations like India, and as a result, the export controls might not be long-lasting. India, which previously relied on shipments from the Middle East, had to turn to China as Europe also began exporting urea from the Middle East after experiencing disruptions due to the world's biggest urea exporter, Russia's war with Ukraine. Also, at a gas station I visited earlier this week that's used by many truck drivers due to its location near Incheon Port, an employee confirmed that there is enough pumped DEF, and they haven't witnessed the long queues that were seen 2 years ago. And prices of urea solution here were also within the regular national average price range, but he said the demand for DEF in containers is higher than usual.
The DEF in containers does get sold out almost as soon as it comes in. It's actually sold out today, but we're not experiencing any dramatic delays in orders.
Why is it important for South Korea to diversify its supply chain?
While the situation doesn't seem as serious as it was in 2021, it's still really important for South Korea to diversify its supply chain, as China has moved to restrict exports of other key raw materials as well. Beijing said last week that it's also tightening export controls over ammonium phosphate, 95% of which comes from China. As such, Finance Minister Chu Kyo-hon and related ministers earlier this week announced that the government will be extending the tariff rate quota on urea and ammonium phosphate. This quota was set to expire at the end of this year, but will be extended until the end of 2024. The government also plans to establish a pan-governmental supply chain management committee by June next year that will oversee the creation of supply chain policies. The committee will also decide which items should be designated as essential economic goods and come up with ways to stabilize supply chain risks. Meanwhile, the Industry Ministry announced on Wednesday that it plans to reduce South Korea's reliance on specific nations for key items by 2030. This will be done through achieving self-sufficiency, diversifying import sources, and stockpiling raw material inventories. This includes investing in the building of production facilities and cutting shipping fees for businesses importing from countries other than China. One expert says that policies based on providing financial incentives will likely prove to be the most effective. Let's take a listen.
To increase domestic production and diversify import sources, the government needs to provide tax cuts, subsidies, and reduce shipping costs to compete with China's competitive prices.
So while it may take time for these policies to prove effective in actually diversifying South Korea's supply chain, they will hopefully be a step forward in preventing not just another shortage crisis with just urea, but with other key raw materials as well.
Thank you for your report today, Susan.
Thanks for having me.
Winter rains are persisting throughout the country. Unlike the usual winter rain, this rain will be strong and heavy, just like in summer. The rain will gradually expand to most parts of the country, getting heavier as time goes by. Particularly heavy rain of 10 to 20 millimeters per hour is expected to be concentrated from tomorrow morning to afternoon in the central region, and from the afternoon to night in Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces. As for the amount of rain, there will be up to 120 millimeters in the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province and up to 100 millimeters in the west of Gangwon-do, as well as in Chungcheong-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces and mountainous parts of Jeju. Most parts of the country, including the capital area, are expected to have 20 to 80 millimeters of rain between now and tomorrow. In addition, a heavy snow warning has been issued, as heavy snow of up to 50 centimeters is expected in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do. Please be careful with slippery roads. Tomorrow morning in Seoul will start at 5 degrees Celsius. Daytime highs will rise up to only 6 degrees in Seoul. Busan will reach 19 degrees Celsius.
From the weekend, a cold wave warning will be issued nationwide as cold wave Arctic weather moves south. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.